Hello, I'm Esther Gitu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Israeli forces strikes in southern Gaza town of Rafah send civilians seeking refuge in areas already packed with displaced people. And the United States Congress seeks a strong and coordinated response to tackle conflicts and instability in the Sahel as it examines its policy toward the region. VOA's Ignatius Anor reports. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Fighting continues to rage in Gaza between the Israeli military and Hamas militants. The southern Gaza city of Rafah was hit twice overnight by Israeli forces, according to residents. United Nations officials say there are no safe places left in the besieged territory where there are dire humanitarian conditions. Distribution of food, water and medicine is being prevented outside a small slice of southern Gaza. As the urban warfare continues, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated an urgent call for a humanitarian ceasefire and warns that Israel's bombardment will soon lead to a complete breakdown of public order. The United States is calling on Israel to limit civilian deaths and displacement, saying too many Palestinians were killed when it obliterated much of Gaza City and the north. But the U.S. is also pledging unwavering support for Israel and appears likely to block any such UN effort to halt the fighting. Aid trucks were seen entering Gaza on Thursday through the Rafah crossing, according to video released by the Palestine Red Crescent Society. Tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians are crammed into the Rafah area on Gaza's border with Egypt to escape Israeli bombardments, according to U.S. officials. The humanitarian organization wrote on social media that it received 80 aid trucks containing food, water relief assistance, and medical supplies. However, there has been no confirmation on the location or the date the video was filmed. A UN report issued on Wednesday revealed that although some aid had entered Gaza from Egypt through the crossing, its distribution by the UN had been hampered by a shortage of trucks and because staff could not report to Rafah because of the surge in hostilities since a truce collapsed last week. Violence by Israeli settlers in the West Bank is escalating, according to Palestinians. This is happening even as the Biden administration steps up pressure on Israel to stop settler violence by ordering a U.S. travel ban on extremist settlers involved in attacks. Henry Wilkins visited the scene of some of the recent clashes and reports from the West Bank.
In the olive groves of Hawat Bani Hassan in the West Bank, Palestinian villagers escorted VOA to the spot where Ahmed Assi, a 41-year-old father of 6, was killed during clashes with Israeli settlers just 3 days earlier. After the fighting died down, his brother says villagers found his car abandoned in the middle of the road.
Someone from the town spotted his car in the location where the incident occurred. So we went there, and the people who had been with him searched for him in the last place he was seen. He was found shot and must have been dead for approximately 4 hours.
The settlers came from a settlement across the valley. On a map in his office, the mayor of Hawat Bani Hassan points to Israeli settlements surrounding his community. Ibrahim Arsi says another member of the community was killed by settlers in February, but they've exhausted ways to seek justice for that killing with the Palestinian or Israeli authorities.
We call all free citizens worldwide, especially those from America and Britain, to intervene and prevent Israel from perpetrating these massacres and hold them accountable for the actions of its settlers under its protection. These settlers target civilians who lack any means to protect their lands.
In recent weeks, the Biden administration has been putting pressure on Israel to stop the violence by Israeli settlers against Palestinians. On December 5th, the US announced it would ban extremist settlers from obtaining US visas, following repeated requests to the Israeli government to control the violence. In the cycle of violence, 31 Israelis, including children, have been killed in the West Bank by Palestinians this year, according to UN data. Rights groups say fatalities caused by Israeli settlers have doubled since the war began, and that settlers are better armed and more aggressive.
In previous problems with settlers, there would be one guy with a handgun, but now there's a group of guys and they all have M16s. And that the threats are much more severe and immediate, like you need to get out of your house and leave your community within 5 days.
In a written response to VOA, the Israel Defense Forces officials said the IDF and civil administration are taking all necessary actions to maintain the security of all residents in the towns and villages in the region. The IDF said it broke up the clash that killed Arsi, but the local mayor said the IDF was supporting the settlers only. As for Arsi's oldest son, aged 15, he says he couldn't believe his father was dead when he learned the news.
They have made me take the burden of responsibility for my family at such a young age.
The Regional Council of Israeli Settlers did not respond to VOA's request for comment. Henry Wilkins, VOA News, Harat Bani Hassan in the West Bank.
VOA's Ignatius Anol attended a U.S. congressional hearing Tuesday on Capitol Hill, where lawmakers questioned top White House officials on U.S. policy options in the Sahel amid rising political instability. Ignatius joins me now. Hello, Ignatius.
Hi, Esther. Thank you. The United States Congress is urging, quote, a strong coordinated U.S. response to tackle conflict and instability in the Sahel, which it describes as dire as it examines its policy toward the region. Exacerbating conflict and instability in Sahelian nations like Sudan, Niger and Chad, and West Africa's Guinea, Mali and Burkina Faso prompted a congressional hearing by the U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa on December the 5th. The committee invited senior U.S. government officials to answer questions and provide a pathway to what it sees as a dire situation in the Sahel. John James, chair of the U.S. Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, questioned the U.S.'s commitment to bring in peace in Sudan, for example, citing funding to Ukraine to be more than 20 times the non-military assistance to Sudan.
Ukraine has a population of approximately 43.79 million people. Sudan has a population of approximately 45.66 million people. Yet the non-military assistance that has gone to Ukraine is 12.4 billion, and the humanitarian assistance to Sudan is 620 million. I've heard things like we need to do everything we possibly can. But what I see is you have almost identical population sizes, but 20 times the commitment financially to the people of Ukraine than the people in Sudan.
Molifi, Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of State Bureau of African Affairs, responded, saying the Sudanese people affirmed that the U.S. has been a true ally in trying to end the current turmoil.
My contacts with the Sudanese people tell me that they believe that we are the best friend to the nation. It is not Russia or China who showed up to try and help end this conflict. It was the United States. We are perceived to be disinterested and care about the civilians and care about the stability of the state. That is not the position of other partners in the international community. The strength we have is that they want to have a partnership with us and they want our help to resolve the conflict.
Celeste Walanda, Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs at the U.S. Department of Defense, says extremist organizations are capitalizing on weak governments in the Sahel and are now approaching countries in the Gulf of Guinea.
In the short and medium term, we will support African-led counterterrorism operations to disrupt the most acute terrorist threats, with a particular emphasis on those targeting U.S. interests. In the long term, we will emphasize bilateral security assistance to African defense and security forces in order to build their own homegrown capacity to counter these threats without excessive external assistance.
Robert Jenkins is assistant to the administrator of the USAID's Bureau for Conflict Prevention and Stabilization. He says the donor agency is working to empower young people in the Sahel with the education and skills needed so they do not fall prey to extremist groups.
The U.S. has been the third largest contributor to the Global Partnership for Education, a multilateral organization providing education services in several countries across the Sahel. Peace and stability in the Sahel requires bringing peace and stability to Libya, which has served as a source of and destination for weapons and armed fighters.
The U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa says Russia is exploiting the instability within the Sahel via its paramilitary Wagner Group to make profits and score geopolitical influence. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department is appealing to Congress to confirm much-needed ambassadors to the African Union, Nigeria, Niger, Somalia, Djibouti, and Gabon.
Ignatius, well, thank you for coming to the studio, because with so much turmoil going on around the world, why is the U.S. Congress focused on the crisis and the instability going on in the Sahel region?
Two things, Esther. The U.S. is concerned that this particular conflict would likely spread into other regions, particularly in the Gulf of Guinea. And secondly, it is also deeply concerned about rising anti-French sentiment, which we've seen since the conflict began in that part of Africa. And particularly for some members of the committee, their concern is what exactly is the administration doing to ensure that such sentiments do not, become an issue that the United States will be facing. And for that, Robert Jenkins of the USAID had said that within the last 18 months alone, the U.S. administration has been ramping up efforts to counter what they say is disinformation plague within the Sahel region.
And this has spread throughout that region, especially with the jihadists over there. But if we can shift gears to talk about Sudan, because I saw that on your report in the Horn of Africa, this war in Sudan has continued unabated since April. Now, what did the congressional leaders say would be the best solution to end this war in Sudan?
So they are calling for the appointment of a permanent U.S. representative that would uplift some of the efforts that some of the ambassadors and U.S. government officials have been doing within the country. And as well, one of the things they are also doing is calling for the determination of atrocities in Sudan. Molifi, who is the Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of African Affairs, had said that just when Anthony Blinken returned from Dubai 2 days ago, she had to confer with him to know exactly what that situation is. And according to him, legalities would have to be considered, and that determination, as Congress is demanding, should be coming very shortly. Esther.
Great reporting, Ignatius. Thank you for covering that report for us at Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Esther.
VOA's Ignatius and all for us here in the studio. Now, the United States says the warring parties in Sudan have committed war crimes. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken says the Sudanese army and paramilitary rapid support forces must end the fighting that is causing a humanitarian crisis. Washington has determined that the RSF and allied militias committed crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing. Blinken said in a statement, the fighting, which erupted in mid-April, has displaced more than 6.5 million inside and outside Sudan, killed more than 10,000 and decimated the economy. The RSF is being accused of leading an ethnic massacre in West Darfur, and in Khartoum, residents are accusing the paramilitary force of looting, rape, and imprisoning the civilians. Officials say a blast at an explosive store wrecked buildings and caused massive damage to an industrial zone on the Seychelles' main island, Mahe. The president has declared a state of emergency beginning on Thursday. President Wevo Ram Kalawan says the blast shook the island as heavy rains triggered flooding, which killed 3 people. Footage broadcast on national television shows streets covered in deep mud and strewn with debris and uprooted trees. The government's official visits Seychelles account on X says the international airport and ferries between its islands remain operational for tourists. The Seychelles, a major tourist destination, is made up of 115 islands and is the least populous country in Africa with just about 100,000 people. Congolese voters head to the polls on December 20th. More than 20 candidates, including the incumbent, are running for president. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
It is campaign season in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and several candidates are generating a buzz. Incumbent President Felix Tshisekedi is running for re-election and is vowing to transform Congo. He is promising to create jobs following a first term marked by economic growth. Still, soaring inflation could derail his chances of winning what is expected to be a hotly contested election. Some analysts say that this could be a repeat of 2018, when Martin Fayulu, a former oil executive, finished second. Fayulu's popularity has also soared in the last 5 years, and his supporters have referred to him as the president-elect, arguing that he was the true winner of the 2018 election. Muhizi Katumbi, 58, is another candidate vying for the nation's highest office. He is a wealthy businessman and is a former governor of the Katanga province, the mineral-rich economic motor of Congo. Katumbi argues that his track record of developing Katanga as a provincial governor qualifies him for the presidency. A new entrant to the race is Denis Mukwege, a renowned surgical gynecologist who was awarded the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to end sexual violence. The 68-year-old has long been a government critic and he's repeatedly urged justice for the victims of the brutal conflict in the East. Despite his fame, Mukwege has no solid political base, and critics say that it might be hard for him to translate his fame into a political win at the polls. More than 20 other candidates are vying for the top job, but political observers say that the lack of unity among the opposition could only help incumbent President Felix Tshisekedi. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Would like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, Zimbabwe has vast natural resources, but the majority of its citizens live in poverty. We'll be right back.
Africa for centuries has produced handmade, traditional and colorful fabric designs with elaborate prints and bold patterns. However, what is thought to be cheap Chinese-made African ethnic clothing is taking over the traditional market, forcing domestic textile industries out of market. On this week's episode of Our Voices, we will discuss the influx of Chinese-made African prints and their impact on local textile industries. Be sure to join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In other news, a Kenyan judge on Thursday has found Facebook's parent company Meta was not in contempt of court for failing to pay dozens of content moderators that a contractor laid off. Labor Judge Matthews Nduma Nderi says Meta did not, quote, deliberately and contemptuously breach a court order requiring the social media company to pay the wages of hundreds of Facebook content moderators. And British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is battling to keep his party together just one day after unveiling a plan to disregard some human rights laws to send migrants to Rwanda. Sunak is trying to stop lawmakers on the Conservative Party's right wing from rebelling and over their demand that Britain should quit international treaties to set its own migration policy. And the head of the African Development Bank says African nations should be exempt from a plan by the European Union to impose a carbon tax on some imports. Speaking on the sidelines of the COP28 climate in Dubai, Akinwumi Adesina, the president of the bank, says the net result of the tax would be for Africa to revert to exporting more raw materials. Many Congolese are calling for an end to the infrastructure collaboration between the Democratic Republic of Congo and China. They are denouncing the low level of Chinese investment despite reports that China has pocketed over $10 billion from mining operations. Zanem Neti Zaid reports.
In the eastern province of South Kivu, the stadium in Bukavu was to be a symbol of cooperation between the Democratic Republic of Congo and China. It was an ambitious project designed to provide the province with a high-quality sport and cultural facility capable of hosting national and international sporting events. However, over more than 5 years of construction, work has come to a standstill several times, leaving behind a shapeless pitch with no grass, unfinished stands, no changing rooms, and no lighting. Pascal Aganze, a local resident and president of a civil society group, expresses his discontent.
It's the Chinese company Sino Hydro 14 that started the construction work on this stadium, and since they started, we've noticed irregularities. I think they're working very slowly. The stadium should be built in a year, but today we are 5 years in and we have noticed that the stadium is not progressing.
Mais aujourd'hui, nous sommes à 5 ans. On a trouvé que ce stade n'avance pas. The contract between China and DRC, signed in 2008 under former President Joseph Kabila, was supposed to trade Chinese mining expertise in exchange for building up the DRC's infrastructure. The DRC was supposed to obtain $3 billion worth of infrastructure projects, the government said, but less than $1 billion has been invested, while China has reportedly pocketed more than $10 billion from mining operations.
Authorities who sign partnerships with the Chinese must be vigilant. I'm glad to see that the authorities want to see the country develop, but they have to control them and keep track of what they're doing so that the work is completed. If they don't, they risk doing nothing.
Chinese companies should have completed several projects by now, but so far they remain unfinished, such as the construction of National Road Number 5, which links the city of Bukavu to Kamanyola in the country's east. The road was intended to facilitate travel for large trucks supplying the region with food and petroleum products. Now, due to the poor condition of the road, the motorcycle cab drivers who use it are calling for the contract to be terminated.
A commission of Congolese government officials and representatives of Chinese companies has been negotiating in the country for months. However, nothing has come out of these negotiations.
A commission of Congolese government officials and representatives of Chinese companies has been negotiating in the country for months. However, nothing has filtered out of these negotiations. Zanem Neti Zaidi for VOA Africa.
Chinese officials in Congo did not respond to VOA requests for a comment on this report. However, in an earlier statement posted on Twitter, China's embassy in Congo defended its partnership with the country, reiterating that, quote, the Chinese government encourages the Chinese companies to work with their Congolese partners to improve cooperation by providing more benefit to the Congolese party and resolve disagreements through friendly and reasonable dialogue. Zimbabwe has natural resources that include nearly 40 different minerals and one of the world's largest deposits of diamonds. Yet the vast majority of Zimbabweans continue to live in poverty. Columbus Mavunga visits the country's famous Marange diamond fields and talks with residents who want average people to benefit more from the country's mineral wealth.
The Marange fields of Zimbabwe is home to one of the world's largest diamond deposits. The precious gems were first mined here in 2006. The government-owned Zimbabwe Consolidated Diamond Company says it is working to increase production so that all citizens can reap the benefits of mining the gems, according to spokesman Shuka Chagonda. And I'm sure we are doing this by way of making sure that we contribute to community development, be it in terms of employing locals, also infrastructure development, sport and recreation, as well as general amenities, which is quite good. And we are also extending to the province.
But the benefits have yet to reach people living nearby, says resident Atro Mshangwiza, who has lived near the Marange fields his whole life.
In this diamond mining area, there is a problem. Children are missing school because their parents are failing to pay fees. We hope that the diamonds can benefit the local children more through schools in the diamond mining area by reducing fees or paying their fees. That's our major concern, so that children have a great future.
Zimbabwe Consolidated Diamond Company says it has started building schools with science labs to improve local children's education. But schooling isn't the only problem that Zimbabweans want diamonds to solve. They say the industry should help the economy more. The problem is that the sector lacks transparency, says Center for Natural Resource Governance Director Farai Magu.
The diamond sector is now subject to extreme organized crime, and the leaders are the only ones who know where the diamonds are going, how the diamonds are leaving the country, where the revenues are going. But as a citizenry, we have been completely disconnected and cut out from any information regarding the diamond industry.
Getting that information would be one way to help Zimbabwe follow the example of Botswana, whose booming economy is largely built on diamonds, according to economist Prosper Chitambara with the Labour and Economic Development Research Institute of Zimbabwe.
And the second one being a beneficiation of those minerals, in other words, moving up the value chain through an industrialization-based process. So I think those two factors are important in terms of ensuring that the ordinary citizen actually gets to benefit from those resources.
Currently, Zimbabwe ranks a distant 7th in worldwide diamond production, despite having diamond fields roughly the size of Luxembourg. Columbus Mafunga, Viewing News, Marange, Zimbabwe.
Thanks, Columbus, for that report. And that wraps up our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.